Every story, it always ends the same way. The hero defeats evil, the kingdom is saved, and then the credits roll. And we walk away believing that that's how the world just is going to stay forever. But Frieren Beyond Journey's End, it begins where every other story ends. The heroes have already won, and the world is safe, or at least safer than it was with the Demon King. And the adventure is already over. And yet the most important part of the story, it hasn't even started yet. Frieren's journey, it isn't about slaying demons or saving kingdoms. It's about making sense of the victory itself and understanding honestly what the whole entire journey meant. It's a story that takes the most famous storytelling formula ever created, the hero's journey, and it quietly and beautifully breaks it. Because Frieren doesn't just show us the end of an adventure, it shows us what comes next, when the hero keeps on living, and the meaning starts to fade. So let's start with what it is that Frieren destroys so perfectly. It's the traditional hero's journey. Now, you may never have heard of Joseph Campbell, but you certainly understand the cycle that he described as the hero's journey. The hero receives a call to adventure, they leave their ordinary, everyday world, they face a bunch of trials, they discover courage, gain new skills, defeat evil, and finally, they return home a changed person. It's the backbone of almost every single story we know and love. Everything from The Lord of the Rings to Star Wars to Naruto, it's always the same kind of pattern. The world tests the hero, and through that struggle, they find their purpose. The hero's journey, it's a story about becoming. But Frieren, it starts after that circle has already closed. The Demon King is already gone, and peace has returned to the land. Statues are built to the heroes, and the happily ever after, it's already over. The story we would normally end on, that big heroic triumphant return, it's just page one of this story. And that small shift, well, it changes everything. Because if the hero's journey is about transformation, then what happens when your main character honestly doesn't change at all from the journey? When we first see Frieren after the war, she looks and acts exactly the same. A decade may have passed, but to her, it might as well have just been a few days on a very short adventure. But for her companions, the ones she traveled so long with, Himmel, Heiter, Eisen, that adventure was the greatest, most defining moment of their lives. But for Frieren, it was just a single chapter, a brief interruption in an endless existence. And so when she stands at Himmel's funeral, surrounded by people in mourning, she barely understands why they're crying. She doesn't feel what they feel, because to her, the passage of time, it doesn't really mean anything. Instead, she cries because she realizes that she missed out on understanding Himmel, and on understanding her other companions. And that's her tragedy. Where most heroes suffer to change, Frieren suffers because she can't. Or rather, that's what she is struggling to overcome, is to try and change. She's immortal, but emotionally distant, forever just outside the world of humans that she helped save. And that's what makes her story so really incredibly compelling. The hero's journey, it ends when the hero learns something about themselves. But Frieren's story begins because she realized she hadn't learned anything from her original journey. And now it's up to her to revisit her journey and learn from it. It takes her over 50 years to start her real adventure. Not one filled with monsters and epic battles, though those exist as well, but with the quiet questions that she never thought to ask before. When Frieren meets Fern, a young apprentice mage, and then later on Stark, the nervous but brave warrior, she begins traveling again. And at first, it feels like a repeat of her old quest. Same old forests, the same roads she traveled before, and the same kinds of companions. But it's not, because now, for every step forward, it takes her backward. Back to the memories of Himmel, and back to the conversations that she never really understood back at the time, and back to those small acts of kindness that she dismissed as meaningless or pointless. Her new journey, it isn't about saving the world. It's about rediscovering what it means to live in the world. And as she watches Fern and Stark, and as she sees them laugh and argue and grow older, she begins to understand what it is that she missed the first time. She's essentially traveling through a museum of her own past, looking and seeing and examining every single artifact and every moment with new eyes. That adventure, it was never about power. It was about connection, and about the people who made the world worth saving. Frieren's second journey, it isn't about conquest, it's about comprehension. And in that quiet pursuit, she becomes something that's truly, really unique and pretty rare in fiction. A hero whose purpose isn't to win, but to remember. The hero's journey, it's really built on one big promise. The hero changes as a result. They leave the home, they face the unknown, and then they return transformed. But what happens when the time stops meaning anything? What if you live so long that the change itself becomes virtually impossible? Well, that's Frieren's curse. Her immortality, it's not a superpower, it's distance. She outlives everyone that she loves and forgets how to feel what it is that they feel. It's not that she doesn't care, it's that she's forgotten how to care. Or perhaps she never really learned it in the first place. The human emotions that drive most heroes, fear and love and the urgency, they don't really apply to her anymore. Time, it dulls everything. Memories blur, and what's left is kind of a numb kind of peace. The kind that looks like wisdom, but is really mostly just loneliness. We can see this especially well when Frieren dismisses losing the ring that Himmel gave her as something that's not very important, because she's so used to losing things. And honestly, it's just basically a defense mechanism for her. She's learned not to value anything, because eventually everything will be lost or destroyed, and it'll eventually disappear from her life anyway. Frieren's story is about rediscovering emotion after losing it for centuries. By watching the humans live and die again and again, she begins to change for the first time in her mortal life. And that's the paradox at the heart of Frieren. The only person who's really lived through the legend is the one person who never understood it. And then that's where Himmel comes back into focus. Because while Frieren embodies the timelessness, Himmel, he represents the exact opposite, the fleeting beauty of a short life lived so meaningfully. He was not a hero because he was the strongest, but because he was present, and he was there. He noticed people, he remembered their names, he stopped to admire the flowers and the statues, and all the small details that Frieren just always overlooked. Because he knew he couldn't live forever, and that's exactly why every moment it mattered so much to him. I mean, think of his constant insistence on his own deeds of heroism, on leaving the statues behind, constantly expressing his handsomeness. None of that, it wasn't out of narcissism. Instead, it was a conscientious effort to leave behind a legacy of kindness, basically a lantern, a light in the darkness to guide people. When Frieren finally realizes this, it's decades too late, and it hits harder than any battle ever could or any fight scene. She understands that Himmel, his real power, it wasn't courage, it was compassion, the kind that leaves ripples long after you're gone. Himmel, he saved the world once, but he remains saving the world forever in Frieren's memory. And through her, his heroism, it continues to live on, not as a legend, but as a lesson. And so, if you try to map Frieren's story onto the hero's journey, it doesn't really fit very well. But maybe that's because she's not following that old map anymore. That's what her circle looks like. The call to adventure, it becomes more of a call to remember. And the trials, well, they become an encounter with the past. And the atonement, that's really just accepting loss. And in the return, it isn't about glory, it's about passing on kindness. Frieren takes this sort of linear quest for victory and turns it into a cyclical quest for meaning. Frieren rewrites the hero's journey into something quieter but infinitely more human. Because for her, the journey, it isn't about slaying dragons, it's about feeling again. It's about reclaiming what time took away from her. And maybe that's what every hero story was always meant to be. Frieren's Beyond Journey, it isn't just a fantasy story. It's a reflection about what happens after the greatness. What happens when the legend fades, when all the friends are gone, and when memory is the only thing left remaining. It's about realizing that happily ever after, that isn't an ending. Instead, it's an opportunity to find meaning in everything that remains. Frieren teaches us that the greatest journeys, they don't end in triumph, but in understanding. That the world, it doesn't really need more heroes to save it. It needs more people to remember why the world was worth saving in the first place. Every single story, it ends the same way, except this one. Because Frieren's journey, it didn't stop at the ending. It began there. And it's a journey that we all need to take. Every single one of us. If you enjoyed this deep dive, then please like the video and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know that you keep wanting more of these types of videos. And as a reminder, we're working towards that all-important 1,000 subscribers, so any help would be appreciated very much. But thanks again for watching.